I'd just like to acknowledge Corinne Albertson's work. She's got married and changed her name. So quite a lot of the data I'm going to be showing is part of her PhD, and to also acknowledge her supervisory team there below and some of our supporters. So this was some data that I showed yesterday, or rather Diana showed yesterday. And if you look at the difference between cats and dogs, I'm just trying to find the pointer here. Is that a pointer? Yes. So cats are actually not doing too badly when you look at the percentage of intake that's rehomed. And if you look at the other way, percentage of dogs rehomed, of animals not reclaimed, they're still not doing too badly. If you look at the transfer rate, very similar to dogs. But if you look at the reclaim rate, it's only 1/10 of the reclaim rate for dogs, which unfortunately then leaves significantly higher numbers being euthanised. So where are these cats coming from? And this data is from a study that Corinne did, where we looked at admissions into RSPCA shelters, and I'd just like to acknowledge the terrific contribution and collaboration with the RSPCA. And so we looked at 95,000 cats coming into the RSPCA over 2006 and 2010. And so they're coming from the general public. And so clearly the general public has to be engaged in finding solutions. If you look at the age, about half are adults and just over half are kittens. Again, where are they coming from? Well, if you look at the adults, about half and half owned and stray. But kittens, there's more stray coming in than owned. And clearly, strategies that target owned cats will be ineffective for the stray cats. There are only 10% of all these cats coming into the RSPCA that were classed as feral, and unfortunately most of those were euthanised. And if you looked at the categories, it was about nearly 20% of cats that were being brought in by the council that were classed as feral, but still 80% of them were socialised. A slightly less percentage of stray, and even 3% of owner surrenders were classed as feral. If we looked at the spay-neuter status, now unfortunately quite a lot of cats did not have their status recorded, so this is of the 55% that did have their status recorded. 64% of owned adult cats coming into shelters were classed as desexed, compared to 35% of stray adults. And interestingly, council strays, 42% were desexed. And that fits with one of the studies that again is a great collaboration with the RSPCA. In fact, they're funding the very first Australian MPhil Masters in Shelter Medicine. And that student is asking people who are bringing stray cats into shelters and own cats into shelters, trying to understand some of their relationships. And some of the people bringing stray cats are in saying, yes, I brought in the neighbour's cat and it just was pissing me off, and I got a cage and I brought it in. I just wanted to teach them a lesson. And they envisaged that they'd get a fine like a dog, but they didn't realise, say in Queensland, within 3 days that cat can be killed if it hasn't been reclaimed. If we looked at the reasons why these cats were coming in, what we saw was that now the people could only give one reason, so this has its limitations, but 91% of the people said it was related to their own issues rather than specifically to the cat. And it was only 4% overall, cats and kittens, where it was related to behaviour, and there was some of these other minor areas. And behaviour was only a reason for relinquishment for 7% of adult cats and 1% of kittens. And if you looked at you broke down those reasons for so this is adult cats, accommodation accounted, lack of cat-friendly accommodation accounted for 36% of those. But if you looked at the kittens, too many, unwanted, own litter, 66% of them were just too many kittens. Then if we looked at that 7% of adult cats that were surrendered for behaviour, and you looked at the reasons, 42% they gave the reason the cat just wasn't friendly or it was aggressive, and 21% generally urination problems in the house. And it was interesting when you looked at the kittens, it was exactly the same percentage that were of people were saying that they just weren't friendly, social kittens, and as expected, a slightly higher incidence of inappropriate urination in the kittens. If we looked at when they were coming in, that belief that it's irresponsible people dropping cats in around Christmas really didn't hold for adult cats at all across the states. And when you looked at kittens coming in, there's this tide of kittens that starts about September and goes right through. And it was interesting to see how that pattern was replicated across the states in Australia. If we looked at outcomes now, to recognise that this is cats from 2006, 2010, and I've just been looking at the most recent data, and it's really heartening to see the improvements that are being made. But from this data here, we had only 26% of adult cats being adopted, which is pretty dismal if you're an adult cat coming in. Now, it has improved a little bit. We've still got a way to go. When we looked at microchipping, only 13% of reclaimed cats had a microchip, and this was probably an overestimation. So microchipping in this study was not a major factor in the reclaim of cats, which brings up the question why. If we looked at euthanasia reasons, for adult cats, 46% of cats were euthanised because of their behaviour. For health, for both kittens and adult cats, ringworm and cat flu were very common causes for health-related euthanasia. And for kittens, age was just being too young. And this is a slide from Kate Hurley's presentation, and there's many other examples in North America, and I suspect if we, Joy had some, I'm sure, data there too. But the important thing is, as the cat intake here shown in blue decreases over years, so does the shelter cat rate. And in fact, from Peter Marsh's book, he has this quote, that the drop in shelter euthanasia rates over the past 20 years has been produced almost exclusively by a decline in shelter intake rates. So that's how important it is to stop the cats coming in. So what can we do to save kittens from owned queens? Over half the cats coming into the shelter were kittens, and nearly 40% of those were from owned queens. Yet from surveys we know that of owned cats, it's likely over 90% are de-sex. So how do we stop those kittens coming in? So the data from North America and from Australia shows that about 30 to 70% of cats are not sterilised before 6 months of age. But more importantly, 12 to 20% are having a litter of kittens before they're sterilised. So we've clearly got to reduce the spay delay, and that message that has to get out there, it's not good for the cat to have a litter of kittens, it's not good for the kids to see the circle of life that way. There's other ways they can learn about it, and you do have to get around to it. And so it's clear that vets need to include spay neuter in the initial health program for cats, so it has to be vaccinate, vaccinate, neuter. We don't give owners a choice of having a second vaccination, and the data shows that cat health is better, cat behaviour is better if they're de-sexed before 5 months of age. So that's when we should be recommending, not just recommending, we're saying, see Mary on the way out and she'll book the cat in to be de-sexed in 2 weeks' time. But for that to happen, clearly there needs to be change in values and thought, and professional organisations and veterinary organisations need to embrace early age de-sexing, and at the moment that's a bit of a battle. And universities clearly have to train their students to graduate with skills in early age de-sexing. And I think for that to happen, it's really important that animal welfare agencies take the initial step and partner with universities to provide that opportunity. And we need to graduate veterinarians who are sympathetic to the challenges facing shelters and are not critics. And again, for that to happen, universities need to partner with shelters to increase the awareness of the magnitude of what's facing shelters. And I really strongly believe we've now had a shelter rotation for all our final year students for now about 3 years in partnership with the RSPCA and also in the first couple of years the Animal Welfare League. And it's really amazing what comments the students, how much they say it's opened their eyes and how much they're committed to doing something in practice when they graduate and taking responsibility. So what about saving stray kittens? Well, there was a survey done in Victoria where 33% of households or phone respondents said they owned a cat, but another 22% said they fed a cat, it wasn't the neighbours, and they didn't perceive that they owned it. And it's really interesting to see how similar those statistics are, both in other states, so 27% in South Australia, 25% of American households. In Ireland, it was about 11%, but that was essentially equal to the owned cat population in Ireland as well. So that population of semi-owned cats in Australia is equal to about 2/3 of the owned cat population, but only 20%, 1 in 5, are desexed. And so the statistics are telling us that 45 to 50% of cats and kittens coming into shelters are stray and unowned, but they're socialised, so they're these semi-owned cats. And therefore the cats that are fed by people who don't perceive the cat as their own are a very significant contributor to a source of kittens and cats. And it's clear that we need some more research to understand the attitudes of people who feed cats but don't take ownership, and what are their barriers for those people to take ownership or at least have them desexed. And based on that knowledge of what drives that behaviour, then to develop some social marketing messages that will change that. And what we're finding, some of the comments are, I love the thrill of feeding something that's wild. I don't want to catch it. So what social marketing message do we need to put out there to change that behaviour and that attitude? And then we need to provide the opportunities for the desired behaviour. So we know when the kittens are coming in. That kitten tsunami starts in September. It started. So we need to start that desexing blitz in April. We know, and I've actually hidden the postcode numbers in case you live in those, of where the cats and kittens are coming in from. And the RSPCA, and I'm sure the other major welfare agencies that are using Shelter Buddy and Shelter Mate know where the problem areas are. And you can see here, there was only, when this study was done, this is Queensland, only 2 postcodes had euthanasia rates less than 50%. But it's actually not percentage, it's numbers that we know, and we've got that data too. So clearly, there needs to be subsidised desexing of cats and marketing of that. And who will that be by? Will it be the vets? Will it be shelters? Will it be mobile vans? And I believe there's actually a place for all of those. I do think that vets already have the bricks and mortar, and there's the opportunity for ongoing healthcare. So if at all possible, to galvanise and get the local vets involved in this. Who's going to subsidise it? Usually vets are asked, and often they will contribute. Some of them are quite reluctant to. Shelters, governments. And what if every $100 spent in the community on subsidised desexing and marketing of that saved shelters at least $200 in bringing the cats in, finding homes for them, or killing them? And there's a little bit of data coming out of New South Wales that show for dogs, those statistics actually are correct. What about saving adult cats? Some data from North America shows that 60% of cat owners who relinquished a cat had actually visited a vet in the preceding year, and that the majority were relinquished within 9 months of acquisition. So you've got a short window to act, and veterinarians are absolutely at the coalface, veterinarians in practice. And they can save lives, and they need to know that. And I know when I was in practice, you didn't want to ask about behaviour problems, because in those days there weren't any drugs you could sell the client. You could spend 15, 20 minutes talking out a behaviour problem. There was another 5 people sitting in the waiting room, and it was much easier to find an ear problem that you could send the person out the door with some eardrops. And we need to have much better training of our vet techs, so there's a real group of veterinary technicians coming out, so veterinarians can ask about behaviour routinely, but they don't have to feel they can solve it. They can say, see Mary on the way out, because every Tuesday in the month we have a night class on how to prevent blah, blah, blah. And it only costs you $10 or $20 to join. Come along. We need to increase the availability of pet-friendly accommodation, and clearly, particularly in Queensland, the default clause is no pets allowed. So we have to get strategies that will change attitudes of landlords and body corporates. Because we estimated that annually about 9,000 adults and about 2,000 kittens were becoming homeless and coming into the RSPCA because of lack of accommodation. And if you expanded that to the number of cats coming into pounds as well, it's probably 30 to 40,000. And when you think about that 50% euthanasia rate, well, a fair number of them are losing their life because the landlord won't let them keep the cat. What about saving stray adult cats? Well, we know that population's a pretty heterogeneous population. Consists of lost owned cats, semi-owned cats, and feral cats. And feral cats in Australia have a pretty bad name. Yes, they do kill wildlife. But is this the solution? And of those of you who saw the Insight program and saw this, these images of holding up feral cats that had been shot. And this is a map of Australia. It shows where feral cats are most dense. This is the highest density. These are least dense in the arid regions. And based on the cost of taking rabbits out of Macquarie Island, I calculated that the cost of eradicating cats from Australia is at least $1.5 trillion. And talking to Chris here, it's probably quite a bit more than taking out rabbits, which in fact exceeds our gross domestic product. So it's clearly unaffordable. And the money that's spent by councils trapping and killing cats is pretty ineffective, because the calculations show that they're probably only killing 2 to 5% of cats, and we need to kill 50%. And in fact, to eradicate cats from Australia, we have to ban people keeping pet cats and kill all of those as well. And clearly, I don't think the community would support that. So we need to identify areas of high net value to us for endangered wildlife. But we also have to be cognizant that just removing cats may not actually be beneficial to the wildlife. And there's a beautiful example of this on Macquarie Island, where the cats were seen as the real baddies, so they took the cats out. And what happened? Parts of the island started to slide into the sea because the erosion was so bad because the rabbit population exploded. Yes, cats eat rabbits. And so I think the solution is not to spend money by councils going out randomly shooting 4,000 cats, but to identify areas where it's really high value with the wildlife that we want to preserve. We have to fence it, and then we have to take out all the introduced species. And I don't think this is a solution, the random shooting. So, strategies to prevent adult stray cats. We know that 35% of adult strays and 42% of adult council admissions are sterilised. Likely, many of these are just wandering owned cats. And people delay looking for their cat. Oh, it's probably come back. And in fact, municipal councils, if you don't like your neighbour's cat, they'll provide you a trap often to bring it in. So clearly better strategies, I think, are needed to keep cats on owners' properties. And veterinarians certainly have a role when they're vaccinating those new kittens in advising on that. And physical fencing is best, but if that's not possible, controlling them or confining them in some ways like this. But in fact, if they've trained with a reputable trainer, the electronic fencing works quite well and actually can be less stressful than this, but clearly other cats can still come in. Now, this was some data from the States which showed that cats are 3 times more likely to disappear from households than dogs. That only 1 to 2% of cats are reclaimed from shelters. Now, our data shows 4%. 66% of lost cats were found because they returned home. And only 7% of lost cats were found via a call or a visit to the shelter. So in fact, cats were 13 times more likely to return by non-shelter means than by shelter means. The community has to be engaged in solutions. And again, this was a slide from Kate Hurley's where she compared it with the outcomes for California over a 10-year period where 71% of these nearly 4 million cats were killed, and a solution that the Erie SPCA came up with. Whoops, we didn't get that slide. Don't know why it's not showing it. Oh, well, it's not showing it. But in fact, they decided that they'd ask people bringing stray cats in to hold it until a place came up. And while they were waiting, would they consider keeping the cat or could they help find a home for it? And what happened? 45% of people found a new home for it, 15% decide to keep it. So in fact, 59% kept the cat or found a home for it. It dramatically reduced their intake into the shelter, and after implementing that, they didn't kill any more healthy cats, and they rehomed 96% of their sick cats. And they said they were amazed how well the community accepted it. So strategies to save cats. We must decrease intake. Ask the surrenderer to hold the cat until a place comes up in the shelter and find a home or consider keeping the cat. For those that don't want to do that, have a quick adoptability test on entry and give them realistic advice. If that's a poorly socialised male cat that's undesexed, it's probably got maybe a 10% chance of leaving the shelter. And from the study that we're doing with the RSPCA, asking people about the cats they're bringing into the shelter, 40% of people bringing a stray cat in have been feeding it for more than a month. And they talk about how they talk to it, sometimes they touch it, they really have an attachment to it. They don't want to see it killed. So we have to be honest with them what the opportunities are for that cat. We need to have subsidised spay-neuter programs, and again, data coming out of the States is showing that if people don't perceive they own the cat, they won't pay more than $20 to have it spay-neutered. And we need a list of real estate agents with pet-friendly accommodation. We clearly need to improve the efficiency of microchipping, and I was really delighted to talk to Rick Walduck to hear that he's going to implement annual text reminders to keep the details up to date. And that's the Central Animal Registry that's going to do that. And we'd like to do some research to show, does that significantly increase the number of people keeping their details up to date? Fast tracking, we don't have time to really talk about it, but it has been mentioned here. Putting the most adoptable cats up first, actually, it's not intuitive, but not only does it increase the numbers of cats rehomed, but it actually helps to decrease the euthanasia of those difficult to rehome cats. And we have to stop cats getting sick in shelters. We know that cat flu rates vary from less than 10% to over 90%. Shelters often euthanise if they start to sneeze or if they haven't eaten for 2 days. We know, we've heard that cat housing causes stress, increases cat flu rates. We have to decrease stress. And in fact, some data from San Francisco SPCA showed that it cost them $500 to rehome a cat, but $900 if it got cat flu. And that wasn't mainly from the medication, that was from the increased stay. And of course, if they're staying longer, then more cats are euthanised because they're holding up cages. So I ask you, what if every veterinary student graduated sympathetic to the challenges that you're facing in the shelter, are motivated to help from practice, and were skilled at early age desexing? That shelters and government agencies redirected significantly more resources into subsidised spay-neuter programs supported by effective social marketing messages, that were targeted to the areas that are generating the unwanted kittens. They're targeted for autumn and winter to stop the kitten tsunami. They're supported by effective social marketing messages that target both the spay delay and the people feeding their cats that they don't perceive they own. Every cat was confined to its property, which was supported by legislation, and for those who can't afford it, subsidised or incentives, like our solar panel incentives. Microchip databases had current contact details for nearly all owners. What if people surrendering strays and owned cats are engaged to find a solution? That shelters prioritised resources to stop cats getting sick? What if cats are fast-tracked to increase adoption? That shelters actually don't take in more cats than they can help? And if shelters and pounds and rescue groups all work together to save lives? Would we kill as many cats and kittens? So thank you.